sessions where we look at the research conducted by Academia 2063 based on simulations and past crisis patterns and data analytics on the impact of the crisis on African economies. And of course, we always have policy recommendations for what African countries can do to be better prepared to prepare and plan against shocks of this nature. Today, for this session 15, we will be discussing exposure and vulnerability to global wheat and vegetable oils trade and market disruption, case study of Malawi. And as always, we are looking forward to a highly engaging and interactive conversation. Please do not leave us here in the cold. Go to the chat, tell us who you are, your name, the organization you represent, and what you think about these sessions. And of course, if you have any pertinent observations, contributions, or questions that you would like to be discussed during the Q&A segment, kindly go to the Q&A or the chat, go to the Q&A section and drop your questions, comments, recommendations. And we invite you to raise your hand if you want to be given the floor to intervene during the session. As always, we are providing simultaneous interpretation in English and French. You know what to do if you need translation. And we are live streaming on our YouTube channel, Academia 2063. Now that the housekeeping is out of the way, please permit me welcome our moderator for today's session. She's a senior associate scientist at Academia 2063, Ms. Julie Collins.
Thank you, Dr. Lai. Greetings, everybody. I'm very happy to be your moderator today for our session. As you know, if you've attended the other Ukraine crisis webinars at Academia 2063, our scientists have looked at impacts on African economies through a lot of different channels. And today we'll be discussing specifically the impacts of global wheat and vegetable oil trade and market disruptions on Malawi. And our speaker today is Ms. Leysa Matissal. Leysa is an economist on the trade policy team at the Centre d'études prospectives et d'information internationale in Paris. She's also a PhD candidate at the University of Bordeaux. And prior to this, Leysa, for several years, was a senior associate scientist at Academia 2063 in the Department of Capacity and Deployment, where she contributed quite a bit to the Ukraine analysis and also to other projects of Academia 2063. And prior to that, she worked with the Africa team at IFPRI, where she helped to support national agriculture investment plans, policy analysis in Senegal, and other projects. And Leysa has her master's from the National School of Statistics and Economic Analysis in Dakar. So without further ado, I know we're all looking forward to hearing from Leysa on impacts of wheat and vegetable oil disruptions in Malawi. As Dr. Butake said, please do share your comments and questions in the chat. And let me turn it over to Leysa now for her presentation. Go ahead, Leysa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're joining. So, as Julie said, my name is Leysa Sal, and I am an economist working at CEPI. And it's with a great pleasure today that I'm going to present some of the findings the team at Academia we did on the Ukraine crisis series. And today's topic is about the exposure and vulnerability to global wheat and vegetable oil trade and market disruption, taking Malawi as a case study. So as you may know, and as you have seen in our previous webinar, the Ukraine-Russia crisis has raised several concerns about global trade, and African countries globally have been affected through different channels. And the crisis have raised most of primary commodity prices up. And as you can see in this graph, compared to what we observed before the crisis, we can see that there is some peaks in most of the commodities. And especially today, we'll be looking at vegetable oils products and also the wheat products. Now, first, regarding wheat, we can say that the wheat is has a small place in most of agricultural sector of African countries. And taking the data from FAO, we can see that around 30 countries are importing wheat directly from the two warring countries, which are Ukraine and Russia. And regarding vegetable oils, the direct dependency on Russia and Ukraine is much lower than what we can observe for wheat. And the statistics show that maybe only Sudan has a direct dependency ratio over 5%. Now, when we look at the case of Malawi, our country of interest today, what we see is Malawi imports around 47% of its wheat imports from Russia and Ukraine. And Malawi also depends highly on imports of wheat to satisfy its domestic supply. For vegetable oils globally, the dependency, as I was saying, is much lower, around 0.08%. And but still, the country is depending on imports to satisfy its domestic need. But finally, beyond all these statistics, the size of these sectors within the economy will be the major determinants of the final impact. So for this study, we will be looking at the effects on income, but also on food prices and on food security. And in this presentation, first of all, we will discuss the exposure and vulnerability to trade and macro disruption. Finally, I will briefly talk about the analytical framework and also the different simulation scenarios that were considered. And then we will have a look on the effect on incomes, on food prices, and on food consumption. We will end with some tentative policy implications. For the exposure, let me start with wheat. So as you can see in this graphs, the price of wheat have been increasing when the crisis started on February, and it increased by more than 30% between February and May 2022. After that, we have observed also several interventions from some governments and some actions that have also affected the trend in price, and the price has achieved a high value of $560 per ton when India has imposed an embargo on wheat export in May. More recently, in the third quarter, when commercial exports from Ukraine have resumed, we saw that prices have started to decrease. Just to say that the price have been changing since the crisis started. Now, to see how far Malawi is exposed, we first talk about its direct dependency, but also the import penetration rate. But we can have two kind of exposure. Here we talk about the indirect exposure and also the contagion effect. What happened is for wheat, for example, we see that Malawi is highly dependent on Russia, and which account about 40% of its import. We have also Canada and also Ukraine and United Arab Emirates, which appear as the most important import partners, and they account for most of the imports. So Malawi is kind of directly exposed since the country is trading a lot with the two countries. On the export side, we can see that Malawi exports a smaller a smaller value, but with its neighboring countries like South Africa, we can see also Zimbabwe, and in a lesser extent, Mauritius. For vegetable oils, here, what we have seen that is Malawi is not trading directly with Ukraine and Russia to import vegetable oils, but the country does not need basically to trade directly with these two countries to be impacted by the crisis, because it may be impacted not through its participation through its participation to global trade with some other countries that are affected by the crisis that may indirectly transmit it to Malawi. On the export side, what we saw is Malawi is exporting mainly to Zambia, but also to Zimbabwe, and those two countries may be affected by the crisis if by any chance Malawi also is affected through its participation to global trade. Now we have an idea about how Malawi is trading with its partner. We define an analytical framework and some simulation scenario to see the impact on food prices and also on food consumption. So the analytical framework we use is based on a stepwise approach, considering a single country CGA model, and also that we combine with some simulation model. This is from the academia research toolbox. We use also some other data like the WDI database to update to reflect the macrostructure of the economy. Some other statistics on trade are also used to reflect as well the import and export data structure of Malawi. Now, for the different scenarios, we mainly consider the primary commodity price database that is released twice a year by the World Bank, and it's about 46 primary commodities with some prediction in April 2021 before the crisis started, and also in October 2022 after this has been released. So we define our first set of scenario that we call baseline scenario, where we assume that there is no major changes in the trajectory before the crisis, and we use the price forecasted for the year 2021, 2022, up to 2024. For the Ukraine scenario, we consider changes in prices, but with projections that were made after the crisis started in April 2022. So for to see the impact of wheat, we see that in 2022 there is an increase, a high increase of wheat prices, which is around 43%, and the price has been decreasing over the year in 2023 and in 2024, but still the value is still higher than what we could observe before the crisis. So the same trend holds also for most of vegetable oils, and global prices are projected to rise in 2022 after the Ukraine crisis started. And here, the annual variation of prices is much higher with the projection of April 2022, and it has been decreasing in 2023 and in the last year of projection, which is 2024. So to have this effect, we used the price shocks that we showed just now to see the different impacts on household income, on food inflation, and also on food consumption. Let us start with the effect of wheat price increases, and here the impact on household income show that we have a decrease in income across all household category, whether it is on rural area farmers or on non-farmers in rural area, and the same on urban area. And this may be qualified or assimilated to a tax in income, as it can reduce the purchasing power of this household. But beyond the effect by level, by rural area or urban area, we have also the different effects for different group of household by quintile. And what we see is the decrease in income is higher for urban household and for rural farm household, while for rural non-farm household we can observe a smaller decrease. But globally, we have here, for example, in 2022, rural households which are more affected than urban households. In terms of food prices, we have a higher wheat prices for all household group, and the increase in wheat prices have affected basically the food prices for Malawi. We can see also an increase, a higher increase among low-income households in rural area, and this for both farmers and non-farm households. And rural non-farm households are, from the simulations that we computed, they are more affected than farm households. Regarding the effect on food consumption, the combined decrease in income and also the increase in food prices will likely affect the food consumption at household level. And for all categories of household defined, we can see a drop in food consumption, and this particularly among low income for rural and urban households. And to kind of explain what we can observe for different household groups, it is important to know that the differences that we can observe on consumption basket before the crisis, and also the main habits of household and the share of their expenditure on wheat may be the main drivers of this trend. For vegetable oils, the intrinsic effect of vegetable oil prices increase will affect Malawi depending on the weight of the vegetable oils industries in the agricultural sectors, which is quite low for Malawi, and it's less than 1%. And as a result, the income effect is small and quite negligible for all household groups, and it's less than 1% for all income groups, and also for urban and rural areas. When we look at the effect on food price inflation, the effect of vegetable oil price increases, we can find some food inflationary pressures, but still, due to the low importance of vegetable oils in the Malawi sectors, the pressure is small and is only noticeable in the year 2022. And comparing the different household groups, urban households are more affected than non-farmers. They are more affected than farmers. For the different income groups, the richest group of household are likely also to be more impacted than the poorest household group. And finally, on the food consumption, with the same trend is the impact is globally negative for all groups, and it's mainly noticeable in 2022, and non-farmers are seems like to be more affected than urban households. So to sum up a little bit, what the brief mainly highlighted, with the small size of wheat production sector and also the small weight of vegetable oils in the agriculture sector in Malawi, we can say that this one not likely to have some major impact in Malawi's economy, but the disruption in global markets, although small, are likely to have some negative food security outcomes for Malawi, as we can see the decrease in food consumption, but also the inflation that we can observe, and the decrease in household income. We have some negative income effects overall among rural and urban households, but the effect is higher for low-income urban and rural farm households. And the last point is, as I said, about the food price increase that are more present for low-income households. From the main findings, we identified two main policy implications. The first one is maybe the importance to protect the lower income household from the increase in prices in general, and this may have some impact on food consumption and also on food security. But another important point also is to mainly anticipate how this can be transmitted to prices of local food, because with the increase in weight or vegetables or other primary commodities affected, the consumers may turn to some other substitute that are produced locally, and this can be seen as a two-way kind of opportunities, and we need to anticipate the transmission to protect household, and also to make a better policy option. But as the brief presented, the study was done early when the crisis started, but we try also to see how this can how this can change over time as the crises also have evolved. For vegetable oils, we see that from the latest projection available made by the World Bank on October 2023, we see that although the prices have increased, there is a moderate increase compared to what was projected first in April 2023, which means that the impact, the trend will be similar with less impact. And it's also important to know that for most of vegetable oils products, the prices have decreased compared to the first projection, but it's still higher to what we could observe before the crisis started, meaning that we can still talk about the increase in the price for vegetable oils. The same thing also happened for wheat, and as you can see, with the projection made on April 2023, the increase was planned to be around 43%, while on the last projection, the increase is moderated, and it's around 37%. But still, in 2024, the price is estimated around $405 per ton, and which is basically higher to what we could observe, for example, in 2021, which was around $315. So Julie, I'm going to stop here for the moment, and I thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions or comments and contribution. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much for your presentation on Malawi. Very interesting. I'm going to summarize a few points before we open it up for questions and comments from the participants. You started by telling us about import dependency in Malawi, which is about 100% for wheat. Malawi is completely dependent on imports for wheat, also fairly high import dependency for vegetable oil. Even though wheat plays a fairly small role in diets in Malawi, the wheat that is eaten is all imported. And you talked to us a little bit too about different degrees and different channels that countries can be exposed to global commodity price increases. One of them is direct and indirect exposure through imports from global markets. However, Malawi also exports some wheat and vegetable oil to its partners, and these partners can also be exposed indirectly due to the impacts on prices of what they import from Malawi. You told us a little bit about the methodology and the scenarios that are used to study the impacts of these global price increases. You and your team looked at differences in projections of wheat and vegetable oil prices on global markets made before the Russian invasion of Ukraine and after the invasion. And at least part of this difference can be attributable to the war in Ukraine. So the differences in these commodity price forecasts allow you to create baseline scenarios using the pre-crisis forecasts and the Ukraine crisis scenario using the post-crisis prices. So both wheat and vegetable oil prices were expected to increase very significantly in 2022 due to the war, projected to start decreasing in 2023, but much smaller decreases than the increases in 2022. So prices were expected to remain high. And then you looked at several different kinds of impacts of the increases in wheat and vegetable oil prices, impacts on household incomes, impacts on food prices, and also impacts finally on food consumption of different categories of households. And you found that all categories of households were affected by the changes in wheat and vegetable oil prices. For wheat, impacts tended to be higher for lower income households. For vegetable oils, you found pretty small impacts, really noticeable only in 2022. And some of these impacts due to vegetable oil prices were higher for higher income consumers rather than lower income consumers. You mentioned that major macroeconomic ramifications are not very likely through these particular channels, through the global wheat and vegetable oil price increases. However, they could still create some noticeable impacts in Malawi on household income and on food consumption. And finally, you mentioned that when we look at further price forecasts that were made in later 2022, we see that those forecasts are still projecting higher prices in 2022, but not quite as high as those that were projected immediately after the crisis started. Thank you for that, because I know that it's very pertinent. People are probably wondering what were the actual impacts or what are the later impacts. So even though these newer projections show lower price increases, the prices are still projected to have increased significantly. So we can still assume that many of the impacts that you saw in your simulation predicted probably came to pass. And you discussed some policy implications and the need to protect lower income houses from food price increases, and also the possibility of contagion, of transmission of global price increases to prices in Malawi, including prices of other local staples, things that might be substitutes for wheat, for example. So I think there's a lot of really interesting points here, a lot of things to unpack. Some of those might be, what do we know about the transmission of prices to Malawi? I know that some of our teams at Academia 2063 have done some work on this. But before I ask my questions, let me ask the participants if there are any questions from you. I don't think we have any in the chat, but please do raise your hand if you'd like to be given the floor, or please feel free to use the Q&A in the chat to ask any questions. If we don't have any questions immediately, then Lisa, could I ask you if to tell us what you know about one of the final points you mentioned, the possibility of transmission of these global wheat price increases and vegetable oil price increases to local staple prices in Malawi? What have we learned? I know that I think you haven't worked directly on this, but if you have information to share, or if we have anyone in the audience too who has worked on this, please feel free. But let me give you back the floor, Lisa. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Julie. So with the Ukraine war, here we mainly focus on global wheat prices, and as we see, we have an increase that is noticeable since the war has started. But I know that also, even though the transmission is not completely to local prices, there are some studies, and I think there are some briefs that were conducted also at Academia 2063 that shows that the shock observed in global trade have been transmitted, perhaps partially, to local prices of wheat, and yeah, the transmission happens also locally, and not only for wheat, but we have also several other commodities, including vegetable oils and cooking oils that were also affected. Some other commodities like sugar also, for which the prices have been increased locally. And yeah, there is really the transmission from the global trade to the local prices in Malawi as well. But I'm not sure if Dr. Kirwal is around, but I know that they have done some deeper analysis on the issues related to the transmission to local commodities. But yeah, it has affected the countries at local level, not only on the international market.
Thank you very much. I see a hand from Lai.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Lisa, for that great presentation. Just some clarification. When I was looking at the research in the brief, I see that you find that food consumption effects are primarily experienced among higher income brackets in urban and rural non-farm households, but not so much among rural farm households. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on this tendency? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Lai, for the question. And yes, as you can see, we have different impacts for different group of household and for different income groups. And this is basically explained. This can be explained by several things. One I can mention is about the share these products is accounting for the household group. If, for example, urban households are consuming more wheat, they are likely to be more affected than households that are consuming, for example, maize or cassava more than what they do for wheat. So mainly the structure of the country and also the different habits of the household may be some drivers of the food consumption. On the other hand, if it is about household producers, the household that are producing maybe the more impacted because their revenue will be more affected. So we can talk about two channels. One is the share of these products on the expenditure of this household group, and another one is maybe how it's affecting their income. So that's what I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That's very interesting. And as Dr. Lai mentioned, the results are very interesting, looking at the differences between wheat and vegetable oil and the differences between the different income brackets. And it's very pertinent to know that it's not just the consumption channel, but also how households might be affected as producers that are creating some of these impacts. I see a hand up from Innocent Thindwa. Innocent, would you like to take the floor? Please, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, and thank you so much, Lisa, for a very exciting presentation. So I just wanted to confirm one bit that Lisa has kind of already alluded to with respect to the question that was asked, because I'm from Malawi. So I think as the study findings are, indeed, I think wheat for us here, the space for wheat in the economy, in the macroeconomy, is quite low, and generally it's the consumption bit that plays a little bit of a role, and it plays a role through the production of bread. So we import wheat primarily to process into bread, and that bread that is produced is generally consumed by the urban dwellers and usually the high income end kind of households, other than the low income ends. So I guess just like this explained, that is pretty much, in my view, the reason why you don't have particularly the consumption kind of effects on the low household and low income earners, as well as the farm households, because farming for wheat is really low. So you wouldn't expect much of incomes coming through wheat. Number two, I think it's the volatility of, you talked about contagious effect, Lisa. So the volatility of what I would say perhaps complementary products, as well as the substitutes. So I think we had a lot of impact via the soybean production, which is really, in terms of the production side, is really occupying a significant part of the agriculture sector here. The prices for soya went really up, and I think the impacts that we're seeing through the consumption for oils, in my view, could also have come through because of the high prices of soybean, because as you know, I mean, the prices for soya went just up. But then I think recently, like early this year, the price of soybean has gone really down. I think more than 100% from the climax when the crisis had just hit. So that brings me to something that I wanted also to kind of urge or request you, Lisa, and the team, that I guess the model is there. So as time goes, it would be good to kind of keep updating the findings just based on the new data that is coming through, so that the findings and the policy implications there are kind of updated. Over. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me respond quickly, and then Lisa, if you'd like to respond to that. Thank you very much, Innocent. It's good to have, it's good to have your feedback from and your knowledge on the ground. I think maybe let me add to what you said, another suggestion for our scientists at Academia 2063. As you said, wheat is processed and baked into products like bread. It could be very interesting to look at impacts on the agro-processing industry in Malawi of the more expensive inputs resulting from this crisis. What were the impacts on the milling industries and on the bakeries, since they probably bore a lot of the brunt of the high global wheat prices. So Lisa mentioned the work that our colleague Dr. Greenwell Machaya did, tracking commodity prices in Malawi. And I took a look at that information as you were talking. This is published in another Academia 2063 brief. I think probably we can put the link for you also. But when our colleague looked at prices in Malawi, as Lisa mentioned, there were quite a lot of different prices that increased, including wheat, but also vegetable oils, sugar, beef went up, the price of fuel went up. And even the price of maize increased, at least in some markets, not in every market, but in some markets, the price of maize increased quite a bit. So even though wheat doesn't have a very big share in diets in Malawi, there were a lot of other staples that were impacted. And the impacts that Lisa reviewed in this brief are only related specifically to the wheat and vegetable oil price increases, but there were other impacts, for example, from fertilizer and energy prices that increased too, which also created impacts. And you mentioned, Innocent, you made a request for Academia 2063 to continue this type of study, and we hear you loud and clear. We are very interested in doing that. We're planning a new dashboard called the Food Systems Crisis Observatory and Response Dashboard. It will, we hope, have information on vulnerability, on prices, on crises, and on the impacts of crises, and will share information and data that's recent and that as crises are unfolding, to try to continue tracking the long-term impacts of crises and also be ready to track new crises as they come. And let me ask Lisa if you want to add anything to that before we can turn it back to the participants.
Thank you, Innocent. Thank you also, Julie. I mean, you have talked about everything, I think, but what I could add is the price projection will be updated very soon, and I think the next release is planned for end of April 2023. So with this new projection, we can, as you said, maybe update the analysis and try to provide some more accurate results, especially with observed value, and this time not with value that are projected. So this is definitely a good suggestion, and the dashboard, as you said, may be another way to not only track the impact that Ukraine crisis, but all other issues, crises that can affect the global trade in general and its different impacts. So this is, I think this is well noted for them, for the team. Yeah, Julie, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Let me turn it back to Innocent, who has another comment, and after that, we'll go to Sophie for your comment. Go ahead, Innocent. Oh, sorry, Innocent. I thought you had a hand up again, but maybe it was just your old hand. Okay, let me invite Sophie Chitedze to take the floor and share your question or comment. Please go ahead, Sophie. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you for the presentation, Lisa. I just wanted to request if the ongoing follow-ups would also find out the impact on the rural populations, because more and more, even though wheat is not a major commodity in Malawi, but I have seen over time that it is becoming one of the major prestigious, foods as well. So I have observed in several trading centers, rural trading centers, that gentlemen who ride their bicycles in the morning, delivering maybe firewood town or maize, selling maize, vending. When they go back to their homes, they pass by canteens and where scones and whatever bakery products are sold, and that's a major relief to them when they get back home really full and happy. But what was the impact of the Ukraine war on such populations, and what was the alternative product? In the end, what is the way forward for Malawi? I am also based in Malawi. I'm Malawian. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope my question is clear.
Yes, I missed part of the beginning, but I think it was clear. You're interested in knowing the impact on the population that is starting to consume more and more these wheat products. Yeah, I agree. I think that's very, very interesting. And of course, the whole issue of dietary change is very interesting. And we know that it's happening quickly. We know that wheat still makes up a small share of diets in many African countries, but that share is increasing very quickly. And it could be having a larger increase than we realize, just because data collection has not maybe caught up yet with how fast wheat is growing in terms of a share in people's diets, wheat and processed products in general. So yes, your point is taken. I think that it's very interesting. And we'd definitely like to look at this kind of thing. I can tell you that we have an annual publication called the Africa Agriculture Trade Monitor, which looks at different trends in intra-African trade specifically. And one of the chapters in this year's report is going to be looking specifically at the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war on intra-African trade. It may not get down to the nitty-gritty of individual traders and how they are affected. It will probably look at the more broad lines of how intra-African trade is impacted. But I think that will be very interesting to see. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. That will be coming out around September. Lisa, did you have any response you wanted to give or anything to add?
Maybe I can comment quickly. And yeah, as you said, with the growth and also the level of urbanization, we have seen that wheat is more and more important for household, especially for urban household, which are tempted to consume more processed food. So yeah, it's interesting to see how these groups may be affected, and for sure the change of habits. With the change of habits, the different groups will be impacted differently. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. And there's a hand from Antoinette, so we'll go to you in just a moment, Antoinette, but let me add maybe one thing to something that I said earlier about impacts on agri-food processing industries. I know that we've seen in some of our previous work that access to inputs is a huge challenge for agri-food processing industries. It's a challenge when these inputs are domestic because it can be difficult to get them from small farmers locally. And so some research by FAO has found that the firms that tend to be most successful, the agri-food processing firms, are those that use imported inputs. For example, those that would use wheat flour imported have better success sometimes because they have a very reliable source of inputs. However, what has changed now due to the changes in wheat prices globally? It could be interesting to look at that. So let me go to Antoinette, who has a hand up. Please unmute yourself and take the floor, Antoinette. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa, for your presentation. It was very informative. And also thank you for Julie and the other participants for the question and answer given. I'm just going to ask a very quick question about the data. Most of the data that Lisa presented was based on the World Bank, United Nations. I just wanted to find out if any field visit was conducted in 2021 and 2022. Thank you.
Okay. So for the data on world market and global trade, basically the data available for the global market is from the World Bank. This is what we have used. But for the simulations, what was used is the micro data of Malawi that were considered. And I know that when the transmission to local markets where analysis was done, Dr. Kirwan and team used the data from Malawi national data that will account for prices observed at local level. But definitely for the international market, the source that was available, and maybe it's quite normal to have some international data source to have information at the global level, but at a lower level, yeah, the data used I think is the data for Malawi at national level that was collected. I can check the source, but I'm quite sure that it's it's data observed at local level.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Antoinette, for the question. And yes, Lisa, I have the Greenwell's brief on local commodity prices in Malawi open, and the data was data received from the Malawi Ministry of Agriculture, their price monitoring survey. So that local data was used in this other brief. And again, I'll drop a link in the chat in just a moment. And I see that unfortunately we've pretty much run out of time. Thank you very much for your questions. If anybody had something that they didn't get a chance to ask, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can follow up with you later. Let me ask Lisa to give a few final words on her presentation. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you also for all participants for their contributions, questions, and comment. So we have some interesting results here on vegetable oils for Malawi, and I think it's up to us to basically make use of it and see how it can be used for policy implication, for policy recommendation, and those products are gaining more and more place in the consumption of Malawian household. So it's important to have them not only because they affect the global trade, but they can affect also local prices but they can also affect other local staple food who can appear as a substitute. So thank you everybody for your question, and thank you also for to academia for having me with you today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you again for the great work and for your presentation, which I know we all found very interesting. Thank you to our participants for your great questions and also for your comments. Thank you to those of you from Malawi who shared some information on what's going on the ground. And we definitely encourage you to continue attending our webinars on the Ukraine analysis. Also, please do take a look at our briefs, both the brief that Lisa presented today and also several others that we have on impacts of the war on Ukraine, on Malawi specifically, through different channels. So thank you very much, and let me turn it back to Dr. Lai Butake.
Thank you, Julie, for your excellent moderation of the session. And of course, thank you, Lisa, for yet another rich and interesting presentation as one of the several authors contributing to the Academia 2063 Ukraine Crisis webinar series. Thank you to all our participants. Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for always making it a date with us and for staying till the end. And we welcome you to join us same time next week for session 16. And we will be discussing with Dr. Greenwell Machaya, who will present on the impacts on commodity markets in Zimbabwe. And the session will be moderated by Dr. Anthony Chapoto, CEO of the Center for Agriculture and Food Policy, Zimbabwe. So we're looking forward to a very exciting conversation next week, and we trust that you will be there, and next time you will come with a friend. Please don't miss all the links shared in the chat. You have a link to academia2063.org, to our Ukraine crisis portal, where you can have free access to our Ukraine briefs shared via that portal. And also go to SlideShare to see all the PowerPoint presentations from our Ukraine Crisis webinar series. Of course, follow us and join the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Academia 2063. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure hosting you, and see you same time next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.